Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about working with images, both photos and graphics, and we're going to use the Adobe program Photoshop. There are other programs that you can use to do some of the things that we'll be doing, but Photoshop is a nice one-stop shop to be able to work with photos and to be able to create your own graphics for your website. As the name implies, Photoshop started out as being a photo editing piece of software, but it's really grown over time and has lots of robust features. And we won't be able to cover all the features in this class. It's something that you can play with and do a lot of exploration and learn new things as you go. But we're going to cover the basics of what you need to be able to do the projects for this class. So first of all, where do you get an image? Most of the time these days we're shooting images with a digital camera, and that makes things very easy. They're already digital files, and so we can just open those right into Photoshop. But you may have the situation where you have to scan a printed image. It may be a photo that you had from the past. It may be a magazine article or something from the newspaper or some other sort of printed document. And so we have scanners in the 212 lab, and you can go in there and scan the image and get that into a digital file, and then you can open it in Photoshop. Another place where you can get images is off the web, and sometimes we find images on the web that we would like to use. You can do that as long as you have rights to use the image. And so if you go to Google Images and search for something, you'll find lots of really cool images about everything. If you click on Search Tools here, this drop-down will come down and give you a lot of options to filter your search. And if you go under Usage Rights, you can find ones that are labeled for reuse, label for reuse with modification, label for non-commercial reuse, and non-commercial reuse with modification. So find the right usage rights for you to use that image. And regardless, you should always credit the source where you received the image so that people don't think it's something that you created yourself. So Google Images really makes this very, very easy to do. Now we need to speak for a moment about resolution. I'm sure everybody has had the experience where you've opened an email from someone and there was a picture, and when you open it up it was gigantic. Maybe somebody just had a baby. And what that means is they just sent a picture right off of their camera, and they had probably shot it at a very high resolution. So what resolution means is the quality of the image based on the pixels per inch in that image. And pixels are just little dots of color created with light that create the image by blending the colors on the screen. The screen is composed of all these little dots, and they're a certain color. And so a screen resolution is 72 pixels per inch. And that's all you really need to use. Other than that, you are making your files too large and unnecessarily large. I've got a demonstration here to show you a little bit more about how resolution works. So basically, we are going to illustrate this with some very small numbers to make this make sense. Total resolution of an image is equal to the width times the height times the resolution in pixels per inch. So in this case, if each one of these dots is in 1 inch of a document, then that's 1 pixel per inch. And we have 4 across and 4 down. So if we wanted to calculate the total resolution of this image, it would be 4 times 4 times 1 equals 16. Again, we're using very small numbers so that this will make sense for you. Now, we want to be able to increase the resolution of this, increase the small r there, because we want to be able to perhaps use it in a printed document. And printed documents require much higher than 72 pixels per inch for the quality to look good on paper. It could be 120 dots per inch for black and white, or it could be as much as 300 pixels per inch for color. So in this case, again, the sort of small demonstration, let's say we want to increase the 1 pixels per inch to 4 pixels per inch, but we want to hold the total resolution the same. And so if we do that, we see we have grouped 4 pixels in each inch. We've kept the 16 total resolution fixed because we don't want to add resolution to the document. We want to fix the total resolution that we received the document in, the original resolution. And so in order to do that, to finish the formula, width times height times resolution, in order to get that to continue to equal to 16, the image is now 2 inches by 2 inches. And so you can see that if you increase the resolution, in order to retain the original quality, you have to reduce the size of the image. And that's why you can't really use images you pull off the web in print documents. And this will make a little bit more sense as we go, because I'm going to show you how you can do this calculation right within Photoshop. And that's the first thing we'll do. So coming back here to Photoshop, I have this image, and there's some people on our faculty, and we were working in a workshop at the beginning of the semester, and I took this picture in the lab right here. And first of all, I can look at this picture and I can see that it's very large because the view that I'm seeing here is only 50% of its actual size. And I can see that by looking on this tab. You want to always pay attention to this tab because you may think that you've sized an image the way you want it to look on the screen, but perhaps it was much smaller or much bigger by the indication of the percentage on the tab up here. So always pay attention to that. And then we want to size the image. So let's go here under image size. And this lets us take a look at the dimensions, and we can change what we're looking at it in, which the units are. So I can switch these to pixels if we want to look at pixels or inches. You can see that the resolution for the screen is 72 pixels per inch, and that's what we want to shoot for the computer. But let's say we wanted to, for some reason, print this picture out. Maybe we wanted to put it on a poster. And so the best way to do that is to look at this resample. And when resample is on, the resolution is not hooked with the height and width. This is very helpful when this lock is here because it constrains the height and the width so we don't get a stretched image. But if we turn off resample, it will also connect the resolution to the height and the width, and then we get that formula that we were just working on for total resolution. So the total resolution will not change. The image size will not change. So here we want to perhaps make the resolution higher. So we want to print this in color, and we can see that now the largest we can get of this image, which we thought was very large to begin with, but when we print it at 300 pixels per inch, it's only 10 by 8 inches. Back at 72 pixels per inch, we can get with the original quality a very, very large image, which we really don't need for the web. So I'm going to turn the resample back on. And what that resample does is it will give you the opportunity, if you want to make the resolution larger and keep the image larger, that you would be able to do that, and the program Photoshop will try to figure out what color the new quality of the image should be, and you really don't ever want to do that. So I'm going to turn this off and keep it at 72 pixels per inch, and I'm going to change this to a size that's more reasonable to put on a web page, maybe something below 8 inches. Again, we can also switch this to pixels to see how many pixels we're looking at, and I'll switch this to something more reasonable in pixels, 800 by 600, and we'll go with that. So I'm going to say OK. Now again, we're looking at this image at 50%, so I want to make it bigger. And I'll just use this magnifying glass tool here, and I'll click on it until I see that that is at 100%. So this is the size of the image that we're going to use on our web page. And so the image looks pretty good. It's pretty clear, but it's maybe a little bit dark. So there are some adjustments that are quick and easy under image. So under image, I like to go through these auto features here. The auto color, the auto contrast, and the auto tone, and see if I get any improvements here. And any of those I can undo if I don't like the effect that it gave me. Just go edit, undo. You can only step back once with the undo, but if you need to go back further than that, there is the history panel, and you can go back and take steps further back with the undo. So this picture, I think, looks a little bit dark, and there are different ways to adjust the brightness. There's this very first one that lets you just easily adjust, bump up the brightness a tiny bit. And you can see, if you just make it a little bit brighter, that's okay. If you go too much, then it gets sort of blown out. And usually if I bump up the brightness, I bump the contrast up a little bit. So that's okay to do for a very light brightness adjustment. There are also other ways to do it. I really like using the levels or the curves if I have a dark picture that I'm trying to brighten up. And there are different ways that you can work within the histogram here and the graph that you can move things around, and it keeps things in relationship to one another, so you can pull these things around. You can even do it by channel, red, green, or blue if you want to. But the most helpful thing in the levels is these little eyedropper pickers. And so this is to sample the image, and we want to set the white point, this particular one on the right. So we click on this, and then I pick on something that should be pure white. Maybe it's a little gray looking in the picture, and I know it's a piece of paper that I'd like to be white. So let's see if this will do anything. And what that does is it should take the image and make everything adjust to the effect that we just created by clicking on the white. So it makes this white, but it makes everything else adjust in that direction. Let's try another one. Let's come here to this one. And you can see when I click on that, it's a piece of paper. It adjusts everything in relationship to that piece of paper being white. And so that gave us a little bit of a brighter effect. So if you like what you have, you can say okay. If you don't, you can always cancel. There are other things you can do under image adjustments. Sometimes I like to use the HueSaturation to work on colors. Maybe a color is a little off because you're under fluorescent lights, like we are often here. And so you can adjust the hue of the yellow. You can see, if you want those Post-it notes to be really orange or more yellow. And you can create a saturation. You can either make it more or less saturated to get the effect. Sometimes if your colors are blown out a little bit, it's good to adjust the hue and saturation. And then you can always select items in the image, and you should crop the image appropriately. This image looks okay, but if I want to come in here and use the crop tool to maybe get more of the ceiling out of this image, I can do that. I can drag this down, have not much of the ceiling. Another thing I like to do with crop is to set the ratio, the constraint here for it, and I can have it by a width by height resolution. I can say, one of these already established ones, or I can create my own preset for it. And that's always helpful. I sometimes come in here and just type in exactly what I want. And so sometimes when you come to the computer and you first sit down to start working and you can't figure out why you're not able to adjust the crop, it's probably because somebody has set the ratio up here. Sometimes you want to select things in the image, and in this particular image we don't need to do that, but there are a lot of selection tools. So we have the marquee that has different shapes, and I should point out that any of these with the little triangle in the bottom corner, if you hold down on them for a second, you'll be able to see all the different shapes that you can select. So if you don't see something that you think you should have, then just hold down on it. Quite often you're looking for the bucket fill, and it's under the gradient here. So there's the paint bucket tool. So there's all these different shapes that you can select something. So if I wanted to select something here and then only apply what I'm doing to that selection, I could cut this piece out, I could paste it, I could apply some sort of an effect or a filter just to that particular selection. And then there are other ways to make selections. There's the lasso tool and different types of lasso tools that let you get closer to an image. So if I wanted to select something in more of a unique shape, I could do that. The magnetic lasso is actually pretty cool because, like, let's say I'm trying just to select Dale here. It's going to let me do that. All the way down. It makes it a little bit easier to select him. And then we've got a selection of Dale there that we could, if we wanted to, cut or move a piece of him out. And then another tool that I use quite a bit is the magic wand. And that's really helpful to pick something that has a very defined selection. Like, it probably will select most of this computer. And I just touched it, and you can see the little marching ants that selected that computer, or this piece of paper here. And you can adjust the tolerance to get it to change what it selects and whether or not it's a contiguous selection, which means it's all together, or it's non-contiguous, that you would want it to select everything that's sort of that color in the picture. You can see that it selected a lot of silver here. And so that requires you to play around a little bit. This is very helpful if you want to remove a background, a solid background from an image. It's really easy to select the background and then delete. And I'll show people how to do that later. Sometimes it's easy to select the foreground and then you can inverse the selection and have it make the selection opposite, and then you remove the background from that. So again, that's something that you'll be able to play with. Another feature that I don't use very often, but it's kind of fun to use, is this rubber stamp, or what's called the clone stamp. And the way that works is you would set a target somewhere on the image. So let's set a target over here somewhere on JC's head. We would select the Option key and click. You see that little target that comes up. And then we'll move somewhere else on the screen, and I'll give you a little tip. The square braces will increase the size of the brush or decrease it. So I'm increasing the size of my clone stamp brush, and I'm going to kind of come up here in the top and start drawing. And look, it's JC's head up in the sky, a little sort of disembodied head. This isn't a very practical application of it, but it does demonstrate how it works. So let's undo that because we don't need her flying up there in the sky. But a more practical application would be if you needed to pick up a pattern and somehow use that pattern. So let's say, for example, we wanted to just get rid of this post-it over here, and I'll make the brush a little bit smaller, and I will hit the Option key to set the target somewhere on the table, picking up this wood pattern, and then I can come over here and I can just draw over the post-it, and it looks like it was never there. I picked up the wood pattern to do that. Of course, you have to be considering ethical implications of making manipulations to photos like this, but sometimes it's good if you have like a wrinkle in a photo, it helps you fix that. If you have something that is an imperfection that's easily fixed, but it should not be used to deceive or to mislead people with the image. And then you can add text to an image if you want. I mean, I don't do this very often, but if you wanted to add text, here's the text tool. You add text by clicking on the image. You'll notice in the layers palette over here that it automatically makes a text layer for you. And then I just start typing here, and I would say digital faculty at work. And that's too light to really see, so I can come up here and I can change the color of the text if I want to, and do all sorts of different things that I need for it to do to see what that looks like. Maybe I'll move that. And you'll notice that I use this move tool. This is probably the tool that you'll use most frequently. Once you have something in a layer on its own, you can move it independently. Very, very helpful. Now for this image, we want to use it on the web, and we've done two things. We have manipulated the background and we have put some text on it, so that created a new layer. So for this image, I would want to first save it as a PSD, that's the Photoshop file, and give it some sort of a meaningful name, something that you'll recognize later. And this will be the file that you'll be able to open up later in Photoshop. And then we would do a Save for Web. This is a very helpful feature that Photoshop added that lets you automatically put it in a web format. You can come over here and you can pick which file format you want to use. So this is a photo, we're going to use JPEG. And I also like using this 4up because it lets me compare image qualities so that I can see exactly how big the image is going to be when I save it for web. So take a look at this. The original image quality in the PSD is 1.18 megabytes. The new Save for Web version is 110, almost 111 kilobytes. That is much smaller. That's like 10% of the original. So we have a nice small image that we can use that will not use a lot of bandwidth on our website. It will not take time to show on the page, and it won't take a lot of space in our web server. So save this. You can give it a different name if you want. You can keep it with the same name because you'll also still have the PSD. So I'll save that. And then I always do like to keep the original image. So this image had the file format from my digital camera. It was actually off my phone. And so I would save that image as well. So I would always have the original quality of that image. And then when I want to use this image on the web, I would use the JPG and not the PSD. The web cannot understand PSDs. So now I just want to spend a few minutes showing you how you can use Photoshop to create images like a logo or some other graphic you might want for your page. I have a logo that's starting to be set up here, and on this logo I have just two text layers. I have it one that says coding and one that says for journalists. And I just set a file new to set this up, and I determined the pixel size that I wanted it to be. But you can also adjust that later by clicking on either the image size or the canvas size. The canvas size will actually crop it or make the actual canvas, the background, bigger. The image size will adjust everything that's on the image, so be cognizant of those differences. And so in this case, I have these 2 text layers, and this is the beginning of my logo. I could leave it like this. I could try to do things like these effects here, and these effects are very cool. You have to select the layer you want to put the effect on, and then you'd pick effects, and you would pick the effect that you want, and a little dialog box would come up here that would allow you to apply the effect to that particular part of the image. So you can see I have this stroke effect now that's on my word coding. And I'm not really pleased with that. I'm going to change that to 1px, so I'll just double click on it again and go back to my stroke and change that to 1px. And the reason why I didn't like it was that the stroke was actually bleeding onto the dot on the eye and the eye. So I just didn't think it looked that good. And there's all different kinds of effects that you can try. I really try to keep it as simple as possible, but you can experiment with things like glows. I sometimes will use a color overlay to quickly change the color of something. Say I wanted this to now be a different color. I would come over here to color overlay and pick the color that I want it to be. So now I want to try it in blue, and that's always kind of fun. And you can see these sub layers that get created when you add the effects, and if I don't like that blue, I can just turn it off and go back to the red that I had. Another thing that I want to do to this is add some sort of a shape, something geometric on here, or perhaps an image from the web. So first thing I want to do is add a new layer so that it can be independent. I'll add a layer, and then I can use the shape tool over here. It's over to the side, and there's circles and rectangles and things that you can do here, the ellipse. So if I just wanted to maybe make a circle on the page, the color that it's going to be is the color that you have selected in your foreground. So maybe I just want a gray circle, and I'll put here. If I hold the shift key down, I'm going to undo this. If I hold the shift key down, I can get a perfect circle. And that looks kind of terrible because it's covering up my words, but if I want to change the stacking order of these layers, I just come over to the layer palette and drag this to where I want to go. These kind of stack on top of each other. And again, because that circle is on its own layer, I can use the move tool and I can adjust it. And another tip is, like, if you need to just bump something, use the arrow keys. I use those a lot. And because this is on its own layer, I can also add effects to this. So if I wanted it to have some sort of a drop shadow, I can add that effect to it. I can actually see what it's doing when it's over there. So I don't really like that drop shadow effect, so I'm going to cancel that. I think a better option for this logo, and a shape might be fine for certain types of logos, and we can look at a lot of very simple logos, but a better example for this might be to try to find some sort of a computer. So I'm going to turn this logo off, and if you turn the visibility eyeball off, that means it's still there. I could reference it if I wanted to, but when I go to save this image right now in this state, it won't be a part of it. So I have an image saved that I'm going to open up that is a computer. And I found that on Google Images, and so it's just this little computer, and it opened up on its own layer, on its own tab. And you can see it here. It's just an outline of a computer. And I want to drag this with the move tool into my logo. But to do that, I have to unhinge this tab here and get it out of the tabs so that it's own sort of free-floating image, and I can see both. And I'm just going to drag it into this image and drop it, and you can see it here, and it created its own layer. It's not the right size. Sometimes if things won't drag, it's because their modes are not compatible, so you have to come up here and change things to the RGB mode so that they're compatible. And because it's on its own layer now, I can do Edit Free Transform to adjust the size. And if I hold the Shift key down, it'll retain the dimensions of that image. And I'll hit Enter, and that's where I want it to be. It's underneath all my text, and that looks okay. If I wanted to adjust the free transform, again, if I thought it was too big, too small, I could adjust it, put it in a different way on the screen. I think it ended up getting too stretched. So we want it to look like a real computer. So this is looking pretty good. I'm okay with this. I mean, I want to adjust it so that the journalist would look like it's standing out and not be covering it up. So I might adjust the size a little bit, but we'll go with this particular image here for my logo. And so now I have an image here that has several layers. So I want to make sure I save the PSD. So File, Save. Save As if you haven't saved it already. And then to use it on the web, I have to do a File, Save for Web. And then I'll choose over here, just like I did with the photo, I'll choose GIF or JPEG or PNG. And basically JPEGs are for photos, and there's a reason that they optimize images with lots and lots of colors in them best. And GIFs are good for flat color, like what we have on this particular graphic. PNGs are very good options too because they're sizable, but for now let's just talk about GIFs and JPEGs. And so I'll save this as a GIF. I can see that it's a very, very, very small file, and I will save this where I want to use it. And then I also have the GIF version of it that I can actually put onto my website. And in addition, I have the PSD if I ever need to come back and adjust it. Warning, be very careful. Make sure you always, always, always save the PSD that retains your layers, because if you need to come back in later, change the stacking order, put different words on here, change the color, do any modifications at all, you have to do it in the PSD. The JPEG or GIF version will not retain your layers, it'll flatten them out, and you won't be able to make the modifications that you want to make. So that's it. That's Photoshop in a nutshell. You'll be getting a lot more experience with it as you play with it yourself.